Well, welcome to our first attempt at a patio conversation on Facebook Live. We are excited for everyone who's joining us now, and as well as the individuals who might catch this a little later on when we put it on our website. We're joined here by Kathy Gray today. She'll introduce herself in a little bit, but I just wanted to open up this little interview. We're going to be discussing mental well-being during the age of coronavirus and beyond. And so I'll open us up with a word of prayer. Jesus, you made it clear to us that we're not supposed to be anxious about anything. You say that worrying about what we're going to eat and what we're going to wear is not going to add any hours or time to our lives, and we know that to be true, and yet we live in a world where we worry, we're concerned. And God, a lot of us are feeling an extra heavy dose of concern and worry right now. And your word also teaches us that we are to cast our anxieties on you, for you care for us, God. So help us to recognize that we do have anxieties, but that we can trust you completely with them and that you want to take them from us. So, Jesus, we ask that you would work powerfully in this time. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. So I am Pastor Luke. I am the associate pastor of the first half of life at Carmel Presbyterian Church. And I'll just give a little bit of context of what I've been dealing with for the past almost 2 months now, as this shelter in place has been underway in the Monterey County area. I've noticed basically two kind of streams of thought, especially with students and families, and that is you've got half of them are very much concerned about following the letter of the law, and so they're dealing with something a little bit differently. They're dealing with just being at home a whole lot and navigating being around each other all the time and not being able to get out. And then I'd say the other half is a little bit more laissez-faire about some of the shelter-in-law rules right now. And so a lot of them, teenagers are hanging out with each other, and that's somewhat to be expected. And I've noticed that the authorities don't give them any problems or anything like that. And so they're experiencing something completely different right now. They're getting to see some of their friends and hang out and get a little break from schoolwork. But I think the shared experience is that all of their lives have been changed so drastically. And I think the biggest thing that I've seen change for them is that kids need routines. People need routines, and they've just been obliterated. They don't have routines anymore. And so there's a bunch of confusion. They've lost their sports and their clubs and just being able to sit in the classroom and be around a bunch of different friends and people and their teachers. So it's just, they're just trying to survive right now and figure it all out. And what I've noticed, at least over the past week or so, that there's more receptivity to just some help. I think they've gotten to that point a little bit more, that people are realizing that this is way harder and it's lasted way longer than they expected. And so they're starting to ask for help, which is a good sign. And so hopefully some people can get some help tonight.
Good.
Dorothy?
Okay. I'm Pastor Dorothy, and I have been here at the church for 5.5 years, and I am the pastor to second half of life. And actually, for these last 8 weeks that we've been doing this, my experience has been pretty much the fact that people are feeling very much isolated. And so even if you are not living alone, but you are just, especially in second half, a husband and wife not being able to see their grandkids, I know that personally that was really hard for me, especially when you have that connection often. And especially for your personality type. I know people that are loving, not many, but are just sort of fine. Nothing has changed. But for those that are extroverts and like me and really love the interaction with other people, it's sometimes very, very lonely. And the nervousness sometimes that you feel just with the news and things like that, and wondering. I think that this is really timely that we're doing the interview right now, because we kind of had set up that we would be back, done with this, right? I mean, our hope in California was that by the 1st of May we would be back and we'd have church and everything would be back. And when they announced last week that we'd be at least another month, it was just really hard, really, really hard. So that's some of the context of what I'm experiencing right now. Kathy, why don't you tell us about you, please?
I'm Kathy Gray, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I've specialized in sexual addiction and other addictive processes for about the last 35 years. And what I've seen in my clients, first of all, what you said, Dorothy, about May 1st, the week right before May 1st, everyone was having a much more difficult time because the end in sight was no longer in sight. And we know from studies that we can cope with pain if there is an end in time. Our ability to cope with pain is much heightened, but when it goes on and on and on, it's much more difficult. Some of the other things I've seen is an increase in addictive processes, eating, spending, gambling, porn, alcohol, lots of wine drinking, lots of different addictive processes, and codependency. But I've also seen a tremendous amount of strong recovery work with people going online for 12-step meetings and connecting and continuing the routine. There's been a lot of losses. A marriage that was planned for June that now was changed. And 10 people came instead of 200. People that have experienced childhood trauma, this wakens up the sense of having a loss of control, having anxiety and fear, having more stress, and not knowing what to do with it. And so it wakes up sleeping giants from the past, and it's a time where the vulnerabilities become louder.
Well, I want to start off with a question, Kathy. We know that everybody's going through a lot of stress.
Yeah.
But why is it that COVID-19 stress is different than the stress we had before?
And I'm going to use the combination stress and grieving because stress is really triggered by loss. And there's a tremendous amount of losses going on right now that are very ambiguous. A loss of routine, of attachments, daily attachments, people, work, education, school, best friends, grandchildren. I have 3 adult children that are married and 6 grandchildren, and I just yearn to hug my grandchildren and to hug my kids. And so those attachments are being are being taken away temporarily. And typically, stress and grief has a focus point. You've had a loss of a loved one, or you've lost a job, or you've lost a pet. But these are daily losses that we don't even know about until we try to do it, and it's gone. Being at the grocery store and someone does something kind for you and they can't see you smile, or you can't see them smile. And so there's a lack of clarity as to what the losses are and what the direction is. When is it going to end? And what else is going to change? It affects our sense of identity. And one aspect of stress is the high level of uncertainty. And that's huge.
Right.
And again, when we grieve, usually we grieve something specific. So we go through the 5 steps of grief, which would be denial and anger, depression, or bargaining is in there, and acceptance. But when we don't have something specific, then that loss floats around like a cloud. So we're in fog a lot.
Yeah, I heard that term ambiguous loss maybe 4 weeks ago, and that helped me a lot because I sense that something's wrong, and I don't know how to pinpoint what's wrong. Also, I've noticed that you mentioned some of the unhealthy things that people are picking up in order to cope with this time right now. I, for one, learn a lot from basically what not to do. So I think highlighting some more of just those unhealthy things that are emerging out of this, and then also to give us perhaps some healthy habits that we can bring into our life, incorporate into our life. I've switched over. I have a common practice of having a spiritual director as well as a therapist.
Yes.
And so now I meet every other week online with my therapist.
What a gift you're giving yourself to have both.
I couldn't imagine. Yeah, it's great.
How wise.
So that's just one of my healthy habits. I could list a whole bunch of unhealthy habits, but I won't do that right now.
Thank you.
Some of
I'll
the
let Kathy.
Some of the unhealthy habits is the gather of information. If I know enough information, if I get enough information, I can take care of my stress. But unfortunately, it does exactly the opposite. The more information you get, the more agitation you will experience, and the more information you want. Because it's kind of like a slot machine. Every time you pull that arm and you're waiting for the different cherries to come up, you get a dopamine surge when they come up. That's how searching for information is. Every time you get a new piece of information that you think affirms or confirms what you believe, you get a dopamine hit. And dopamine is the most addictive chemical our body creates. So that searching on social media, on the news, especially social media, fuels the dopamine surge. And it just depletes the dopamine, and we become empty and fatigued and depressed. So that's the number one foundational.
So what would be, if you could quantify it, how much news consumption would you recommend if you could quantify
Be
it?
intentional, number one. Limit it to maybe a half an hour in the morning, half an hour at night, not before bedtime.
Always do it. That's my last
Not
thing
before
bed.
bedtime. Your dreams will be crazy.
Last night was horrible.
Yes, it will be. It will be. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, social media has much of the same effect as the news does. It's about raising agitation. And the more agitated you are, the more you're going to watch.
And you mentioned some of the addictive behaviors, but also just the slight changes that we make in ramping up some unhealthy habits, like perhaps eating the wrong things, these comfort foods. April was not a good month for my waistline, and so I'm trying to make May a little bit different.
Yes.
So are you seeing a lot of that, of just
A lot.
Okay.
A lot. And also, allow yourself, deprivation always balances out with binging.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go the other way to deprivation. So allow yourself, my gift, my treat is popcorn. I get popcorn when I get home tonight.
Dark chocolate.
Oh, there you go. So allow yourself some, but don't go into the deprivation. And give yourself compassion. Self-compassion. We need it. We need to give it to our kids, especially you've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Things are going to be different. This is temporary. This is not the rest of our lives. It's temporary. And to try to find pleasure in small things, for whatever reason, ever since the quarantine in place has happened, we have a wild turkey that walks around our yard, our house, and at 5:30 in the morning it gobbles. And it just fills me with joy. So search, I don't know where he came from, search for different things of joy, because we need to have hope.
My 2-year-old does the same thing at 5:30, and
gobbles?
it's not a joy-filled experience
No,
for
it
me.
wouldn't be.
But Kathy, that you're talking about that, the joy, but I see so many people, and I would never say this is me, of course, but there's a lot of annoyance right now. I mean, the people that go on the wrong way in Safeway,
Yes.
and the ones that don't mute on Zoom,
Yes.
I find that some people of course not me, but
Yeah.
you're easily annoyed. So
Yeah.
tell me about how do we handle that?
Well, I want to address first where it comes from.
Yes.
One of the mistakes we make as believers is that we often think that feelings are bad, that I can't be angry at what's going on, or I can't be sad, or I can't grieve. So we stuff it under the rug. And then there's this big lump in the rug, and we trip over it, and we get irritable. So people that you're dealing with, that in the dailiness of your life, they've got fears and anxieties and anger. And when we're afraid, we build walls around us. And we already have these walls of the masks and social distancing, which fuels our fear. Because then we get afraid of the walls we build, right? And so I'm afraid of you before I even start because of what's going on. And so if you gave a great example about when you were walking.
Oh, yeah.
Would you share that?
Yes, because when I was walking on the beach,
Yes.
people were coming towards me, and there was hardly anyone there.
Right.
But they were wearing masks, and we are not.
Yes.
You don't have to wear a mask when you're walking.
Right.
But they immediately went off the path, way off into
And
the
how
ice
did you
plant.
feel?
I felt annoyed with them.
Yes.
But I also felt like I was, I should have been like the leper saying unclean,
Yes.
unclean. And so
Yes.
I felt like they were rejecting me.
And that, I really appreciated you sharing that, because that's such a common feeling. And then if we feel less than, or plague, don't come near me, then we have a negative, angry reaction as well. My husband's name is Dean, and we were walking 3 days ago down this path, and a woman was coming in the opposite direction, and she moved over into the side of the street, and Dean said, "Thanks." And she looked at us and she said, "Oh, you're welcome." And so
You're making me feel guilty now.
no, this is about us reframing the story and changing the narrative and giving grace to each other, which is what we need more than anything, because this
Absolutely.
is hard. And if there is a real key, it's for us not to keep pushing our feelings underneath the rug. We can say to each other, "I am really ticked off today. This has been a hard day for me. Pray for me. Let me tell you why it's so hard today," so we can let it out. Yeah.
And I think that everyone has different, the different contexts of where they're living, right?
Definitely.
Because
Definitely.
your experience, Luke, is completely different than mine
Yeah.
with having little toddlers compared to, so many of the people I know right now are living alone. And I got an email from someone today that said the silence is deafening.
Yes.
And I'm sure that you would sometimes, Luke, want that, right?
Definitely. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah. So we have whole different experience, and
Yeah.
sometimes even finding how to connect is really hard when online things just doesn't do it for us, like Zoom.
Well, because also, especially when you're living alone, one of the biggest losses that we're grieving as a society is physical touch. A handshake, a hug. We don't know how things are going to be different when this changes and shifts. And when I saw you 6 months ago and I'd hug you, there was a chemical reaction that would happen. Oxytocin would be released. And that's a bonding hormone. And it makes me feel good. And it bonds me to another human being. Well, I don't get that from Zoom. I get feedback
You get annoyed when people don't mute.
when they don't mute. And so it's totally different. So when people live alone, there's a real need, and this is hard, there's a real need for them to reach out, even once a day, and be intentional to call one person. And to be outside every day for a little bit of time, to listen to the birds, and not to compare ourselves to others and what they're doing. I'm an introvert, you're an extrovert. Last thing in the world I want to do is call someone. That's hard for me. I'd rather sit and read a book or a quilt or go for a walk. And so don't compare our losses or how we're wired with anyone else.
Yeah.
We always come up losing.
Yes.
Kathy, I don't think we necessarily prepared this question, but I think it is something that is shared, and I've read some articles about it, but not too many, don't worry. And it seems to be that there's this shared human existence right now of a lack of motivation, which seems really weird considering a lot of us find more time on our hands, but we're feeling more depleted and exhausted and lacking the motivation to do our schoolwork, to do our exercise, all of those things. Is there a reason for that?
Absolutely. When you think of driving and and it's winter and there's a fog, it takes much more concentration to drive. You're looking, you don't want to run off the road. You don't want to hit that other car that's coming. You like to follow a car so you can see their brake lights so you know when to stop. We're in a fog right now. We're in a fog of not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing if I have allergies now, you not knowing when I cough, if I'm sick, not knowing how long this is going to last. And that fog tires me out. Doing Zoom, we know from studies, is much more exhausting than talking face to face. Doing FaceTime, much more exhausting. Going to the grocery store takes so much more effort. Dean, did you take your face mask? Do you have your gloves? Do I have my list? We don't want to go there. The line's too long. Doing life takes more energy. And our emotional reserves are really depleted right now. And sleep is not filling them up. So we're going to be more tired, more irritable. We're not going to have the motivation. I was going to clean out all my closets. I did 2 drawers, and it's 8 weeks. This is just the reality of it. Yeah. So give yourself compassion and grace, and really give your kids compassion and grace.
I know I'm already wired this way, so I really do need your help on this one. I get that part of giving myself grace and compassion and giving it to others, but I also don't want to use that as a green light in my own life or give people kind of carte blanche.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want because we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is probably, it's not true, but I would err on the side of grace, but at the same time, you said people are making unhealthy decisions, so we can't just say, oh, it's all grace right now.
Absolutely not, because some of what we're practicing now, we're going to have to unlearn when this changes. And it's going to be really difficult with our kids, with the younger kids, with the teens, to bring back the use of social media. So if I start being cranky and unkind and fearful all the time, I've got some real work to do after the fact. There's some great things I read about for married couples, and I loved it, and for families, and that was a 1 free pass today. And that you have a little piece of paper, and it says 1 free pass. And you can hand it to a spouse or a kid when you've done something stupid or unthoughtful, which means you recognized it, right? And that I'm sorry, I apologize for doing this. And it's bringing some humor in, but it's also bringing in the reality. And another 1 free pass for the week, your wife's going to like this, is she gets to choose it 1 day a week and say, here's my 1 free pass. I don't want to cook tonight. I don't want to do the dishes tonight. Or you may use it and say, I don't want to, my sons are the cooks. I don't want to cook tonight. But it's us giving ourselves a break, but continuing to work together as a family unit. I'm going to mention this later, but I just saw 2 of them today. Life lessons from Mrs. Weiler's kitchen. And they're wonderful. They're for kids, but they're great for grown-ups as well. And it's how we all work together as a family to pick up the dog poop, to empty the dishwasher, to be kind and gentle to one another, and to talk about that. It's great. Yeah. One of the things that Dean and I did also, as we talk about creating a positive reframe, is the first week of the COVID shelter in place, one of the things I wanted him to do was to go through all the boxes of pictures. So we pulled 4 big boxes out, and we found all of our love letters and our cards, and we read them to each other. And it brought back these feelings of love and connectedness, and it made us remember why we chose each other and how we like each other. And it's been helpful to come back to that when we're really tired of each other. Because you're going to get tired of each other, and it's going to be overwhelming at times.
You know, that reminds me when my dad retired,
Yes.
my mom one day said to him, "I married you for better or worse, but not for lunch."
Oh, that's great.
And so I
Day
think
in
that
and day
right
out.
now it's day in and day
It
out,
is.
right?
It
so
is.
It must sometimes for some. But the other thing that I've noticed is that I find, just as I can be annoyed, I find that things just crack me up in the most interesting times.
Do you mean crack you up like laugh?
Laughing. And
Isn't that wonderful, though?
When I was walking on the beach yesterday, and there was a guy who had a little dog in a front pack, like the baby, with his
Yes.
dog, and I don't know why, but
Was it Ben
just-
Bransford?
No, but there's some little things that in this
Yeah.
they just really, they're really humorous.
And
right?
Dorothy, that's part of what is the paradox of life, is that we can hold the sorrow and the loss and the anxiety and worry now, but we can also hold the joy and the fun and the silliness and the joy of now simultaneously, even though they're conflicting feelings. We've got to have that laughter. We have to have that fun.
I need it.
I need it.
Yeah.
We all need it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I guess I'm playing a little bit of the devil's advocate here.
Of course.
But that's kind of what I do sometimes. But
Indeed.
I guess for me, I'm very weary of people just immediately saying, like, find the silver lining or focus on what's good in your life, right?
Yes.
Which I hear a lot, especially in Christian
Yes.
circles and church circles, right?
Yes.
And so I think sometimes that's unhelpful in a person's
is.
grieving process and mourning
Yes.
process. And also I think what's happening, at least for this pandemic, is that people have not really started to deal with some of this stuff
That's right.
yet.
Yes.
So how do we help people to first recognize that they are grieving something, they are mourning
Yes.
something, so that they can begin the process? Not to mean that the sky is falling
Right.
and doom and gloom, but a more realistic picture
Yeah.
of what life is like right now.
I think that the way we do anything is by starting with us. Whenever I can share with someone and be emotionally vulnerable and transparent, that's what emotional intimacy is. That connectedness comes from that vulnerability. So when I can share, last week you and I were talking about this communal grieving that our whole world is experiencing, and that it's so ambiguous, but it's so real. It's the loss of the illusion of control. It's the loss of power. It's the loss of choices. When I shared that with you, and then you shared with me what you were experiencing, we touched emotionally on a deep, real, visceral level. And that's where we start, is we share it with others. And if I'm alone, I speak it out loud to the Lord. Or I speak it out loud to the tree. I speak it out loud. And it's real. And what you said about the saying, oh, it's okay, be in gratitude, look for the silver lining, that minimizes the reality of this is hard.
Yeah.
We have, in our generation, in our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, no one has experienced this. This is very hard. There's another statement that is really unhealthy that just makes me cringe is, well, what's the new norm? Who knows?
Yeah.
We don't know what the new norm is, right? And Luke, earlier you talked about the high school kids, and that this is the first week they're starting to say, this is hard. Developmentally, that's right on for high school kids, for teens. My concern for teens is when this is over. And they are in college or they're a senior in high school and they recognize, it brings tears to my eyes, I didn't graduate. I lost the prom. I missed the first semester of college and moving in the dorm. There's going to be grieving. Just because everything changes doesn't mean the grieving stops. It continues. Different. It changes.
Yeah. So it'd be helpful to kind of even dive into some. We've touched a little bit on families that have kids and married couples, so we can go a little bit more into that, but also to get more into the people who are living by themselves and what they're dealing with. So
Yes.
since you said I should share my vulnerability so that others can benefit from it. Yeah, Judah will be 2 in 2 weeks, and Silas just turned 4. Lalia is a healthcare worker, so she works Monday and Tuesday. That leaves me at home working and also watching a 2 and a 4-year-old. And what I've noticed in myself is that I exercise so much willpower in that time that when Lalia comes home, it's like I feel like I'm entitled to check out. Like, here are the kids, I'm done. Like, I put in my time. I've tried so hard to not be impatient with the kids and things like that, that now I just need to get out of the house. And I know that some of that is healthy, but also I want to make sure I'm doing it in an even more healthy way than just
it's not only healthy, it's normal. It's closet time. It's the old joke, husband's home, wife's home, I'm going to go in the closet now for a half an hour just to get some silence. So if you and Lalia can talk about, she's coming home from a real stressful job, what does she need? What do you need? And maybe if, as you two talk about it before, not then at the moment, but you have a plan that, okay, you can be with the kids for another half an hour while she showers and kind of decompresses, gets sweats on, and then she takes over for an hour or 40 minutes. So you can go for a run and do what you need to do to refill your tank. We all have these buckets inside of us that we need to refill so we can give from the overflow and not empty us out so much. And let me tell you, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old really empties you out.
Yeah, they do.
Big time.
And I know kids are resilient, and so that's the thing I keep coming back to.
They are.
But there's still huge concern that I'm sure other parents are dealing with of like, is this going to negatively impact my children? And if so, what's going to happen to them and for how long, academically, mentally, socially, all of these things. Silas loves shelter in place because he gets like 4 hours of TV a day, which we would never allow.
Yes.
Judah now who used to be the most loving kid, is terrified of every human being because this 2-year-old, one, he hates masks, so he sees every person wearing a mask.
Because it's bad guys.
Yeah. Second thing is, we moved to the other side of the road, and so he just now associates people equal bad. So, and we're going, when this is over, is he going to just not like anyone? So what are the impacts going to be?
It starts with you knowing your children. And one person defined kids as summer daisies and summer orchids. And daisies, they can grow anywhere. And they just flourish and they get bigger. And orchids, I've had this one orchid for 4 years and it still isn't flowering. And I do everything for it. And so as you study your children, you know which ones are the orchids, and they're going to need more time, more words, more tenderness, and they may, and you won't know yet, they may need some extra help, whether it's counseling or little support groups. When this is over, about 20% of children are orchids, about 20%. Doesn't mean they have emotional problems. They just are wired differently. And truly, for your little guy that's 2, he takes everything literally. And his lifespan is so small that this is a huge aspect of his life. Your 4-year-old, it's not as large of an aspect. Your life, it's a blip, even though it's a deep blip. And so one of the things that you're going to do with Lalia is talk to him, as you're doing, and try not to go into the future and write the story about what his problems or issues are going to be, because you don't know. You're just going to be present with him in the here and now with what he needs now. And one thing that you can do to help him, of course, he's not old enough to draw, but
Who?
The 2-year-old.
Oh, yeah, no.
Right? The 4-year-old, of course he does.
Silas would be very insulted if you told him
The
he couldn't draw.
2-year-old. The
Yeah.
2-year-old is the one that takes things so literally about the bad men wearing the masks and whatnot. But you can get a magazine and you can have him draw masks on the faces, and he can scribble over them after he's drawn the masks on them. He can get his feelings out by scribbling, by showing that feeling. Yeah.
And then just, sorry, following up on that, what about some of these parents who might be watching who have teenagers or young adults, or even for grandparents who have adult
Yes.
children? So I'm just trying to cover all the bases of...
It's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, first of all, with teens, really recognize the main thing with teens, it's their social connections. So you're going to have to be very open to them spending more time on social media. This is for now, this is necessary. And that lots of the literature that I've read, the kids are getting a lot more of their education done in a shorter amount of time. And this is giving them more free time.
Yeah.
So recognize that. And recognize that they're going to spend time in their room and be away from you. College kids that come home, you may not see them at all. That's normal. They're used to doing their own life.
Yeah.
Watch for depression. If the isolation, sleeping all day, staying in their room day after day continues for 2 weeks, get some extra help. But it's going to look that way for a while, of them isolating more and listening to music and being on social media and being irritable and being cranky with you, and pray for patience.
Yeah.
You really need patience.
You know,
And-
Kathy, I think that what you're saying right now also applies to what we consider our senior saints.
Yes.
You know, because there's also those that are living in, you know, sometimes we can call it the sandwich generation.
Yes.
So I have had parents whose grown kids are struggling that may have lost their job.
Yes.
And then they also have parents who are in a retirement facility or assisted living who they can't see.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that's really hard is the lack of control, because we now we don't have a choice.
No.
And I think that's one of the
Yeah.
hardest things, right? And I recognize that not having a choice.
I think that's one of the biggest communal grievings we have, is not having a choice. And one of the things that you said just reminded me, we need to be careful of not having everyone else's feelings. We have enough on our plate to carry our own feelings. I can't spend time worrying about how my granddaughter is doing and my grandson are doing. It's about surrender. And the Serenity Prayer, you can go online and look it up, is wonderful. It's about knowing what we can control and what we can't, and surrendering what we can't control, and praying for those things and surrendering them. I do want to give 3-4 resources,
Sure.
especially for parents of young kids. One is a podcast. It's called But Why. It's a podcast for curious kids. It's great. Another one is Little Life Lessons from Mrs. Weller's Kitchen. She's a school counselor, and she has puppets, and she does about a 15-minute little life lesson. Great to watch it at breakfast with your kids and talk about it. Young kids as well. And PBS Kids, they have wonderful things available. And then Audible Books has free audio books for kids. And then this is for grown-ups, and this is something that I have subscribed to for years. It's called Psych Central Newsletter. And it addresses how to deal with your kids during this time. How do I deal in marriage? How do I do this as a single adult? It is a wealth of information, a wealth of information.
So we'll have that on our
Somewhere?
Yes.
Should be
I'm
listed
getting it.
somewhere.
Yeah, it'll be somewhere for you to find. Yeah.
So it's helpful to have those resources, and we've talked kind of around and a little bit about marriage as well. And so I talked to another family who have young kids, and just the fact that you could be in the same house with your spouse day in and day out,
Yes.
and you don't have a conversation, like an adult conversation or any sort of intimacy with that person.
Yes.
Are you finding that that seems to be more the norm during this season with people? Or because I hear all of the jokes, I don't like them.
Yes.
About, divorce attorneys are going to make a killing
Yeah.
after all this is said and done. So how we as the church help go against kind of the movement of our society of saying this is going to be really bad, and say, no, we're going to claim this for Jesus,
Yeah.
and say this is going to be a really good thing for marriages.
I think one thing that stress does is it highlights and magnifies cracks within a relationship that are already there. And we just need to own that and recognize it. This is a stressful time, and so some of those cracks are going to be real evident. And so that if we, as a believing community, can begin to address some of these issues ongoing, this won't be the last time, but to talk about how do you deal with conflict? How do you communicate about difficult things? How does my family of origin impact my relationship with my husband? Big time. But to talk about these things and give tools. This is an opportunity. And if we look at it as an opportunity and step into it, then there's going to be lots of options that we can, as a church community, begin to minister to and answer some of the needs and the questions. And so a couple that's not talking, they probably weren't talking about difficult things before, but now the heat is turned up, so there are lots of things that are difficult. And they just, oftentimes, what I see in my practice, people just need tools.
Yeah.
And once they have a tool and know how to use it, it helps. Give
an example of one of those tools.
One of the tools, especially for a married couple and they're spending time together, like your mother and your father, I read this and I thought this was great. The wife had a purple shirt, and whenever she put that purple shirt on, it meant to her husband, this is during this time, I need 40 minutes alone time. I'm not going to go in my closet, but I don't want you to talk to me, ask me questions, or interrupt me. And he had a sweatshirt, and it had the same deal. I thought that was wonderful. Another thing that I read that was super was a reconciliation walk. That in the evening they would walk together, because when you're walking together, it's not as intense. You're not looking at my face eye to eye. So I can say, it really hurt my feelings when you said that my dress was a little tight. Because I'm not looking at him face to face, and we can talk about it, and then we can move on and leave it and let it go. So creating healing opportunities. Now, people aren't going to come up with these ideas themselves. So us as a church community, let's put out a newsletter. Let's talk about some of these tools. If a person can find one tool that helps them, it's amazing. And the things that are so destructive in any relationship, parents to teenagers, husbands and wives, siblings, criticism, stonewalling, treating another person with contempt. These things are so destructive, and it's about recognizing them and making some adjustments. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have a little bit of time to take some questions from the online audience now. I already have one, unless there's something that you want to say before we take a few questions.
Go for it.
Go for it? Okay. We've got two coming in. The first one is, how does being transparent about our own feelings help others find their feelings.
It gives permission to even talk about feelings. It creates safety. Often we don't talk about feelings because either it's not familiar for us to, we weren't raised talking about feelings, or it doesn't feel safe enough. So when I talk to you about my feelings, I'm giving you permission to do the same, and I'm creating safety. Now, another important part of safety is what you share with me, I'm not going to go and share with Dorothy.
Yeah.
It's about boundaries and keeping things safe.
Yeah. All right. We've got another one coming in. Let me pull this one up. It's got some abbreviations in there that I might not know.
I think it's so cool that you can read your wrist
Yeah.
and you know
I
these
know.
questions.
We are in the future. Okay. The question is, how might we prepare to eventually go back to life, like in real life, when we've gotten used to certain parts of what we're experiencing right now? How do we adjust to returning to some old familiar ways?
I'm going to take the first part of that because it's really important. I can't prepare for the eventuality because I don't know what it's going to look like. I can only work at staying as awake and aware and intentional in doing life now that I can. Some of the real difficulties will be changing digital technology patterns. That's going to be very difficult. It's going to be difficult for introverts to go out into the world again. So part of it is how we're wired. My husband is an extrovert. He can't wait. Part of it is how we're wired. Part of it is recognizing, just as it's taken at least 8 weeks, and we're still not used to this, to get used to what we're doing now, and no one could prepare us for it, it's going to take a while to get used to what the next chapter looks like. So we're going to need to help one another with tools and skills and modeling to each other. We're all learning together.
And this person is, Amanda just clarified the abbreviations for me. They're also wondering about the idea that they've specifically started working from home.
Yes.
And what it looks like if they do have to go back to work. Are you saying to basically not worry about it yet?
No, that is a different situation. If you know, first of all, many jobs are going to continue at home.
Right.
For perhaps a year or more. But if you know that your job, you're going to go back, before that time starts, you want to start talking to your children about that. You need to talk to your pets about it too, because they're really going to have a hard time. But you need to start putting words to it. And if at all possible, if you can slowly do it, 3 days the first week. Economically, it may not be possible. But recognize that when you go back, that the kids are going to go through a real time of painful adjustment. They're going to regress. They're going to act out. They're going to be more irritable. You are too, by the way, because you've got to wear clothes now. It's just more difficult. So there is going to be an adjustment on that specific thing. Talk about it. Talk about it. Hopefully, it coincides with the kids going back to school, but it may not.
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think we have any more online coming in right now. Dorothy, do you have any other questions that you have for Kathy?
Kathy, I am just, this has been so helpful to me because you have sort of put into making it okay to feel the way we feel.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, that we can't take on others' emotions.
We can't do that.
And that's really important.
can't do
because
that.
especially for me in what I do, it's I have a lot of empathy.
Yes.
And it is a challenge
Yes.
because I feel the pain that
Yes.
people are going through, right?
People that are empathic carry such an emotional burden, and it's a part of this grieving is what it is. When you read the information, when you hear from a friend, when you experience the changes. So it helps to create a screen, a filter, so you don't let it all come in. And to recognize that some empathy is valuable. Too much empathy and you're going to drown. And just as some people that I've seen in my own practice have early childhood trauma, and this wakes it all up, some people struggle with codependency.
Right.
And this really wakes it up. Or addictions. This is the time to go and find an online 12-step group. And one of the great locations is called In the Rooms. And they have every 12-step group available for anyone, all different times. And the other place it's great to go to is to the CR, Celebrate Recovery, which is Christian-based, or AA, Al-Anon, SLA. There are online meetings. There's different places to help.
And I think that that's also part of the problem right now is that, or the reality, is that we have COVID,
Yes.
but we also have what goes on anyway, right?
Alongside of it.
And it's
Yeah.
and there's all
Yes.
of that that's just normal life
Yes.
or things, you know, where and so it's just sometimes difficult because we're going, wait a minute, this just makes it more
Yeah.
complicated because there's this, but there's that still going on.
And Dorothy, I wanted to address too, you work with many individuals that have lost loved ones, lost spouses. This period of time of losses wakes up that
Oh, yeah.
bottom layer of grief, even if it happened 5, 10, 20 years ago. It wakes it all up and it brings it to the top, and it makes the feelings of loss that much more magnified. So it's really important to recognize that for others and for ourselves as well.
Absolutely. That really is helpful. Yeah.
All right, we have 5 minutes left before we have to jump off, and I'm going to put you on the spot with
'Kay.
one question. So you've got 2 pastors in our church right now. What can the church be doing better to help with mental health, mental well-being? Or what are we doing well that we could do more of in this season? So how can we help people not just have a question and answer interview with
Yes.
you, which is a great start, but where do we go from here?
And you're welcome to step on our toes right now, Kathy.
Well, I'm not going to step on your toes, but I am going to step on the toes of our Christian community as a large, in whole. And that is, we often shy away from talking about emotional well-being or emotional problems. We shy away from sharing our own struggles. Luke, you shared many years ago about your struggle with anxiety. That gave so much permission for so many people to say, oh, it must be okay to be a strong Christian and to struggle with the reality of anxiety. So I think that we need more messages Sunday morning. The whole message doesn't have to be on depression, but certainly we can talk about David crying on his bed with the tears floating on his bed and wanting death to come. We can talk about that we as believers can be angry, but how do we not let the sun go down upon it? We can have things on our website of resources to go to. I hope we're going to have on the website some internet filters that we need to put in place for our young kids and even our teenagers and for ourselves, so that we can talk about what's real, offering resources, offering workshops, offering from the pulpit what's real, and vulnerability in our own lives. We're all broken. We need a Savior, and He's freed us. And at the same time, we continue to grow and change. And these are very real issues.
Well, thank you so much you approached us with this. So this was your
my passion.
whole idea. So thank you for bringing this about, and hopefully
so
this
welcome.
does open up the door for people to just get better at dealing with this season. I think the hardest part for me is really not knowing when it ends, and so I'm just really appreciative for your heart for Jesus and for His people, and so thank you so much for
Having
joining us.
me.
Yeah,
And Kathy gave me the other day a prayer, and it's from the New Zealand Book of Common Prayer. And I'm just going to read that as we're kind of winding things up. Okay, so let's pray together. Lord, it is night. The night is for stillness. Let us be still in the presence of God. It is night after a long day. What has been done has been done. What has not been done has not been done. Let it be. The night is dark. Let our fears of the darkness of the world and of our own lives rest in you. The night is quiet. Let the quietness of your peace enfold us, all dear to us, and all who have no peace. The night heralds the dawn. Let us look expectantly to a new day, new joys, new possibilities. In your name we pray. Amen.
And isn't it wonderful that Jesus is the light of the world, even in the midst of the night?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yes.
Absolutely. We're going to stop now because as a church, we have a Zoom prayer meeting that begins at 7, and hopefully you'll be able to find the link for that on our Facebook or our website. And so part of the reason that we are a praying church is, as I was discipling a student today, we were in Philippians 4, and so the whole idea says, do not be anxious about anything, but through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And so these are anxious times for people. And so as a church, we want to pray together, and that the God of peace will bring the peace that surpasses all understanding in the midst of so much turmoil, unknowingness, chaos. And so thank you so much for joining us. We pray that you would share this with somebody that you might think this would be helpful for. And we're glad to be with you, even if it's through your screens. So God bless. Good night.
And I want to hug you, Kathy, and I can't. Bye.